Lord, yes, papi. Hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and told to have no bed. I was brought up and told to have no bed. I was brought up and told to have no bed.
Welcome to the Full Circle Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, David Roberts, along with the oral historian, Andre Taylor. Missing today is Dr. Neil Holmes. Dre, I guess one of the first things we could talk about or mention is that President Obama turned 60 this week. So it's interesting. I saw the story and it was interesting. He was having this big party planned on Martha's Vineyard.
Right.
And it was funny, the Republicans were criticizing him for having this big party with COVID, yet they were the same ones under Trump who were, talking about the whole COVID thing was a conspiracy. So it just goes to show, it's like, I guess it depends on who's doing what.
Well, not only that, but when you think about Texas and Florida opening up fully, during the pandemic and saying it's a hoax, it's not real, we're going to move forward with our lives. The Republicans upset with Michigan for shutting down to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And then the president wants to have a party, and then he downsized, I think, 137 workers, they said, weren't able to work because he either canceled the party or canceled the size of the party. And it's just like, wait a minute. So he's saying he doesn't want to do the big thing for one party, one person's party, but y'all okay with open up entire states, massive states. I mean, Texas is not a small state.
Right.
And you're okay with that. It's just the oxymorons in it. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's funny because he's actually, as I understand it, scaling his party back, but it's interesting how they still find a way to attack him. And, when he left office, he was done. He hasn't been, keeping a high profile. And I remember when he was first about to leave office and they announced, don't ask me why it was newsworthy, but they announced that he was going to stay on living in DC, get a house in DC. And of course, we all know that it was because he wanted his daughter, understandably. So you have daughters, I have a daughter. He wanted her to just finish, in her high school. Her life had been disrupted enough, obviously,
right.
And I remember, I think it was Ben Stein. I was watching Fox News because, yes, I still watch it sometimes when I can stomach it, and they were saying, well, what do you take of President Obama saying he's going to stay on in DC? And he was like, all upset. He's a narcissist, like saying he was staying on in DC because he wanted to be in the spotlight and, want attention. And it's obviously that hasn't been the case. He's kept his profile pretty low, but it's just interesting, how they just continue to find a way to attack this man. I don't know if it's because it's entertainment and they know that the people that watch Fox News, that's what they want to hear, and want to see. But, I just thought that was crazy, And
remember, they did get on him from wearing a tan suit.
I remember. And I remember the craziest one, Sean Hannity got on him for actually wearing a bicycle helmet.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is crazy. And showed Putin without a helmet and without a shirt, saying like, this is the manly way, knowing that, to me, the president, and I admit I ride my bike without a helmet. I know that's wrong in a way, but the president of the United States should be setting an example. He doesn't want to be riding around with no helmet and then kids saying, well, at the time, President Obama doesn't have a helmet, that kind of thing. So, I mean, come on, man, come on. And speaking of Obama, his vice president, now the current president of the United States, President Biden, says that the Afghanistan war will end August 31st. Good news. I don't actually know why we were there in the first place, and definitely don't understand, why we've been here this long. It hasn't been getting the news that it used to get. So I didn't even know what was still going on, but, I'm just glad that it's going to end August 31st and people will be coming home. You have any thoughts on it?
I do. And I've always looked at the United States military when it comes to Black communities or brown communities in general. You think about kids who can't make it or may not want to go to college, but you can't find a job. Where do they go? They go to the military.
Right.
And this has been a situation, when the draft was prevalent, you had African Americans that were drafted into the war, and there's always been a tremendous amount of blacks and black and brown people in the military, and they go off to they leave war-torn areas like your Philadelphia's, Detroit's, and Chicago, and you send them off to war-torn places and expect them to come back. And sometimes it's not the way it happens. Other people have the option, I'll go into the military to serve my country. Sometimes blacks, and I know a bunch of them that I went to high school with, I'm trying to get this GI Bill, I want to get a house, I want this, I want that. And so they want the benefits of being of having served in the military, but not necessarily want to go to war. And I don't know anybody that wakes up in the morning that says, I think I'm gonna go fight today. I want to go to war. Nobody says that. I mean, that's just
Right.
ridiculous. But when you see things like a war ending, that's great that it's ending, but what's been the tremendous impact of it all? What communities are going to be decimated? What families are going to be decimated and altered forever? And I'm not just saying that it's just blacks that are being injured and killed over there. It's everybody that goes to war. But when you look at the communities where a lot of these people come from, you start to see this disproportionate number of people that are coming from black and brown communities where it's like, well, that's my only way out. I
Right.
can't tell you how many times I've heard that line, it's my only way out. No, you have options.
Right.
Which way do you want to take out is the question.
Right. And I just hope that uh, the government or United States, whatever we want to say, does a better job of looking after veterans when they come home, because, I don't usually agree with the wars that we're in, but I respect the people that are there that did their job, And so when they come home, it seems like too often, with post-traumatic stress, other mental health disorders, they're not taken care of the way they should be. Being here in the DC area, I see both sides of it. I see people that come home, not necessarily from war, but come home from the military, get these great jobs with defense contractors making 300,000 a year, but then I also see people that may have, that come home maybe shell shocked and have some mental health issues, and they're on the streets, and it just seems like, I don't have all the answers, obviously, but it just seems like we could do a better job of dealing with those people that went over there. It's great to see them in the airport and say, thanks for your service and all of that. That's wonderful. I'm sure they appreciate it, but I'm sure their families would appreciate it more if the ones that are coming home with post-traumatic stress and other mental health disorders were taken care of, and especially when you look at what's interesting, although Muhammad Ali now is kind of universally, considered, very heroic. I saw something on Facebook last week where someone posted a picture of Muhammad Ali, and it's still people who would say, oh, he was a draft dodger, because he didn't go to Vietnam, but then they don't want to talk about the fact that when he came home with the gold medal, he couldn't eat where he wanted, he couldn't sit where he wanted. So it's just some hypocrisy involved in that. I know we have to have a defense, but it's definitely some hypocrisy involved. So moving on from that, because the main thing I want to talk about today, and we'll probably be quick today. We don't have an OG to give us all the insight on everything that he usually gives us. But you participated in a big event this week that has historical significance. So why don't you talk about that?
So this week I had a chance to present at the African American Alliance of Museums, their virtual conference this year. And my topic was African oral traditions and foodways. So you're looking at how oral histories, as an oral historian, I sit down and talk to people all the time about history and their lives and, other things. But one thing that I realize is missing in these conversations is when you talk to Black families, what our oral histories look like. And a lot of times they revolve around the kitchen. Grandma made this, grandpa made that, mom made this, mom made that. And you remember sitting in the kitchen sometimes, and either there was some R&B playing, there was some gospel playing, and there was a whole lot of talking. Do you remember this? Remember when so and so? So our oral histories have this, they're embedded in the kitchen, and in a true African diaspora way. We talk about certain things within the family around big meals. You
Mhm.
know, big meals are our place to have. It's for Black males, it's the barbershop. For Black women, it's the beauty shop. For the family, it's Big Mama's house. You
Well
know,
said. Mhm.
everybody comes together there. You know, there is no secrets at that point. Everybody's sitting down to talk together, eat together, and you start to get true family histories. So when I spoke yesterday, when I spoke, what was it? The Yeah, when I spoke yesterday at the conference, it was mostly to put that out, to talk about how we need to capitalize on these moments. And I shared a recipe from my grandmother and actually prepared the meal while we were live on air. And went over how this was a recipe that she had gotten from, I think it was her grandmother, and
Mhm.
then it got passed down. If you think about her grandmother, that's so many generations ago from me. But now
Right.
here I am receiving the same information that now I get to share with my family. And it's so many generations removed, but the story remains intact. So without knowledge, without even recognizing what we do, we serve as griots on a daily basis in our community. And I don't think that we're taking enough time to really realize the work that we're doing to preserve our cultural heritage. So I wanted to make sure I got that point out to people, because it's important, because eventually all of us are going to be gone someday. Our
Right.
kids will be here, our grandkids, hopefully great grandkids will be here. And we need to leave them something. When we talk about generational wealth, it's not always financial, it's the wealth of your family's history that needs to be left behind as well.
Good point. Good point. It's interesting when you say that because myself at 52 years old, when I go visit my parents in Cleveland, Ohio, I'm still learning things. Like when I sit with my mother and sit with my father, she'll tell me things about, uh, my family, some things when I was very young, some things before I was born. And I'm thinking, why at 52 am I still learning this stuff? Like, I feel like I should know it already. But it just goes to show that it's ongoing, it's constant. And then I'll come back, and share some of those same things with my children, and they're always fascinated. And then what's interesting, I sent my children this summer to see my parents, their grandparents, and I didn't even go. And then they came back telling me things that they had learned, and I was like, man, I guess I slipped up. I never mentioned it to them. Like they didn't know my father was in the Nation of Islam, things like that. I'm like, man, why wouldn't I mention that? And we've sat down and watched things that talked about Malcolm X and this and that, and I never even mentioned it. So I guess I got to do a better job. So tell me, what kind of, oh, I'm sorry, you were about to comment on
It,
that.
it's not that you have to do a better job.
Mhm.
It's human nature. We become complacent. I'm from Philly. And, when I lived in Philly, I didn't go to the Franklin Institute.
Right.
I went to Independence Hall twice, but now I'm coming back as a visitor, and it's like, hey, kids, guess what? We have this. So to you, your father it was commonplace. Like, oh yeah, everybody knows that. So
Right.
it's not that you're doing a bad job. It's just that your commonplace is not their commonplace. Like they didn't, well, first of all, they didn't grow up with them because that wouldn't make them your kids, that make them your siblings.
Right.
So now they get a chance to go and explore it, and it's really better coming from your parents as opposed to you, because this is
True.
actually their lived experience that they can talk about firsthand. You being the secondhand storyteller could be like, yeah, my dad was in the Nation of Islam. Matter of fact, he the one that brought Muhammad Ali in. No, he may have sat in the mosque with Muhammad Ali, but he didn't bring Muhammad Ali to it. So their version of it is always going to differ from yours tremendously, because this is who they are 24/7. So you're not doing a bad job. Let's just go ahead and throw that out there. And I tell
Well,
people that
thank you, sir.
you are like the billionth person I've heard say, I did a bad. No, 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 you didn't do a bad job. It's just that it was complacent to you.
Right.
I think that we become so just stationary because our heroes are often our parents and sports figures and so forth. So our stories are always going to be different. And then when they tell them, it's like, wow, I never knew. So it makes it more exciting, and it actually adds a layer to the story, to the narrative, to move forward, because now you knew, but now they know from directly from the source, and those two stories come together. Imagine what that would do for your grandkids. Now you have a
Right.
full narrative.
Exactly. Let me ask you, what type of questions did you get when you were presenting? You remember anything that
Okay.
stands out? Okay.
Um, One of the big things that came up was traditions in African cooking. Uh,
Hmm.
and then one of the things that we discussed openly, and this was a question that ended up being picked up in Cincinnati. Um, and the Underground Railroad Center in Cincinnati was like, hey, what about foodways with enslaved people and indigenous people? And what a lot of people don't realize, when you hear people joke about, I got Indian in my family, that could really be 90% true, you
Right.
know? And when you start thinking about the introduction of certain foods, okra was introduced to this country by enslaved people who brought seeds with them. And in most cases, the women brought them braided in their hair through the Middle Passage, and they planted it when they got here. So now you have this new plant. You start seeing maize introduced. So now you start to see a collaboration of foodways from different cultures that now all of a sudden gets added, and you hear things like, oh, it's soul food. No, it's not soul food. This is what it really is. A lot of the dishes that you see in South Carolina specifically, and I know this from doing research there for a couple of years, a lot of people have had the low country boil, where it's like potatoes, shrimp, and corn. But when you Google um, Frogmore stew, it's the same exact thing. And Frogmore stew comes from the Frogmore plantation. So I was getting questions about the lineage of food. How do we know this to be true? And it's written down by a lot of white scholars and white enslavers, colonizers, whatever title you want to give them. But realize we weren't the ones reading and writing. You know, with us, it was a pinch of this, a pinch of that, pinch of this, and people would watch our work and figure out the measurements by that. So we talked about foodways and immersions. One of the other questions was, how do you get children to partake in eating healthier, and how do you correlate that to the African traditions? And that one blew my mind, because I've been talking with my wife about that all week.
Hmm.
Went to the grocery store with one of my daughters, and there was a woman, black woman, heavy set, had 4 kids with her, and she had 4 cases of soda in her cart already, and was getting 3 more. It was buy 4 get 3 free.
Hmm.
And one of my daughters, she says, "Daddy, I want sodas like that." I said, "Nah, we're not going to do that." But that's what I want, and so you have to teach them differently. And I said, "We're going to go to a different store." And we went to a different store, and we got some okra, we got some shrimp, we got some tomatoes, and I made okra tomato stew, which is something that arrived here from via South Carolina, and we served it over rice, Carolina Gold rice, and those components were all things, one, that we were brought here for, things that we brought with us, but it was my turn to teach my kids about their lineage, their African lineage via food. I think that a lot of people want to put an onus on talking about chattel slavery, the
Hmm.
beatings, the whippings, and so forth. The foodways are probably the most immaculate way to teach a kid about what happened and with the Middle Passage. Well, how can we eat this? Well, when our ancestors came across on a boat, this is what happened, because kids are already going to be taught, yes, slavery was bad, people were beaten. We have ways of teaching that. But if we only talk about the negatives about it, not the resilience of the people who came through it, we don't
Exactly.
do them any justice. They have nothing to hang a hat on. So being able to explain that yesterday was tremendous, because it's been bothering me all week. And I told my wife, I said, I need a platform to talk about this. So when the question came up, I was like, thank God somebody was listening to me,
Right.
because it's as a diabetic, we're pre-exposed to things. We know this, but we also have an option of not staying there. We have the option of doing better. And just because I have this issue doesn't mean that I want my kids to have it.
Right.
So being able to teach your kids through food, I know that food takes time and you have to go to the grocery store, but sometimes the benefit is worth it.
Right. Any other interesting questions you received?
One
That's the
interesting,
one that stood out the most.
it's one of the ones that stood out the most.
Okay.
Hearth style cooking. The question was, is it important for Blacks to get back to that style of cooking? And the answer is yes, definitely. We do need to cook outside. We do need that open flame. We need to get back to basics. So that was another part of the component of the discussion, is getting back to basics, in the sense that it's okay to go get pizza. It's okay to go get a cheesesteak. I'm from Philly. I'm down with a good cheesesteak.
Right.
But at the same time, it's just like, why not go get some wood and fire up a grill somewhere? Take some cinder blocks and build something. Take it old school. Go back to basics with it. And another question I got is, does it make sense and is it important uh, to get back to growing your own fruits and vegetables? And if so, when somebody said, how do you do it? And I said, well, we never stopped doing it.
Right.
If you think about your grandparents, and almost everybody's grandparents I know had a little garden in the backyard.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It might only produce 3-4 tomatoes, but they got a garden. And what that was is, these were things that were passed down. When you start thinking about the role of the enslaved person, these are the things that get passed down into our everyday knowledge. It becomes muscle memory. And too often we forget that we have this knowledge already. We're a very resilient, intelligent group of people. I don't think we give ourselves enough credit. We know society definitely doesn't give us enough credit for it.
Right.
But being able to say, I harvested my own vegetables. I mean, think about it. A pandemic happened. For a while, people were saying you can't go outside. You can go to the grocery store and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like, all right, so you get to the grocery store and everything is ran out. What do? You started noticing things like bread flour was missing, tomatoes were missing, cucumbers were missing, mason jars were missing, because people had gotten back into canning their own vegetables and so forth. So you start to see this transformation back, this reverting back to basics. And the oral traditions are very entrenched in that, because these are things that we have learned via the oral histories from our family. Sitting in the kitchen, sitting behind the grill with somebody. I mean, watching grandpa sip that yak and tell
Right.
stories about,
Right.
these are our studios to record these oral histories, and they're manifested in the kitchens.
Let me ask you, I have two questions. The first one, when we started doing this podcast, I don't think any of us came in here under the guise that we knew so much and we're experts on everything. It was just a way to have dialogue and interact with our community. So this may be a myth, and you could correct me if it is, but I think a lot of us feel that, being an African people, when we were originally in Africa, different parts of the continent, that we ate a lot healthier. And then through chattel slavery, because we had to get what we could get, we added the salted pork and, had to, fry a lot, and, so on and so forth. So that kind of an unhealthier cooking tradition was passed down, not because we were trying to do harm to ourselves or the upcoming generation, but just as a form of survival, like chitlins, for instance. Is that truth, or is there some myth in that? Am I wrong in that?
Oh, you're not wrong. You're 100% right. When I went to South Africa a couple of years ago, we got there, and I remember first when we got first off the plane, I said, all right, let me get me a juice. Let me go to, they had a vending machine, and I'm an American. Everything is in a vending machine. I was like, all right, I'm gonna go. And I pressed the button for this. It was a mango. It said fresh pressed mango. Bam, I'll get me a mango drink. I'm thinking it's going to be like the Arizona iced tea mango, where it's mango flavored 10% juice.
Right.
And I looked at this one and it said press date, and it was 2 days before I had gotten there. Expiration date was the next day.
Wow.
And it's just like, yikes, this is legit. Drank it, fell in love with it instantly. Different communities we went in. We went into the Shangaan village, which is just, there's no paved road. Everything is dirt road. It's near one of the reservations where they keep the preservations, the animal preservations. And we get message when we pull up, hey, 3 lions escaped last night, 3 male lion. they still had a witch doctor in his neighborhood that was like, I'm ready for it. I'm like, with what? You know?
Right.
But the food that we ate, I came back 10 pounds lighter. And it's not because I got sick. It's not because I was eating less. I ate more. It's just the lack of preservatives and the way of cooking. You know, everything has a second, third, and fourth purpose. You know, over here, you know, we have that coffee can on a stove with all the bacon grease.
Right.
Over there, if there was what they have there, some lamb or sheep, you know, when they defecate, they took that and fueled the fire that they were baking bread with.
Hmm.
I never would have thought of something like that, but
Right.
it has a methane value to it. So there, I mean, the engineering is there, and you know, it was just like, wow, what are we doing wrong? And that's what made me start thinking, like, how far away we had gotten from our original roots, you know, because it was the Bantu people that were around, I want to say central West Africa, and the Bantu people were migrants, and that's the Bantu people, which includes people like Nelson Mandela, ended up in South Africa because they migrated in
Hmm.
search of food and land and so forth. And the Bantu also, Shaka Zulu was Bantu, you know. So you look at these migrant people who were in search of places to grow food, food sources, and you see this manifested even today. You know, one lady had she had mangoes out front of her house, and I said, how much? And I held up some money, and she shook her hand and went in the house, got a bag, and said, take what you want.
Hmm.
And it was just because, and I said, well, I can pay you. She goes, no, live long, be healthy. And it's just like, wow, you know, it doesn't get any more fresher than that. Like, I picked my own mango and ate it.
Right.
Oh, I didn't have to go to the store and get, what is it, 10 for 10 sometimes? You catch that.
Right. Right.
You know, but it was just this introduction to a better lifestyle when it came to eating. Over here, we have those massive jumbo chicken wings, and you know, it look like a chicken thigh or a whole chicken. Over there, they got the old school small ones. I had 8 of those one night and was stuffed. But
Hmm.
it was because they were fresh, the way they were prepared. Most things over there, they don't use regular flour. It's either chickpea flour or it's going to be rice flour. So you're talking about lighter forms of breading, which don't cause a lot of the problems, gastro problems that we have here. You know, it was just very different. I came back before I left. I went over there. I had a cortisone shot for my knee because I know I was going to be doing a lot of walking and so forth. I had lost so much, you know, the 10 pounds was enough to take some pressure off my knees. Felt great when I got back home. I
Gotcha.
started driving by what do you call those places? Fast food places, and the
Hmm.
smell instantly made me sick. So it let me know that there's something going on here that's not going on there, and life expectancy was different. Plus, people just didn't have a care for time. You know, we showed up at 7 o'clock for a dinner, and they said, "Oh, we were expecting about 9:30." I said, "Well, why?" You know, it's kind of rude to show up on time. And I'm like, this is the original CP time.
Right.
That's where it came from. You know,
Right.
but you sit back and you think about it, it's just like, why was I rushing? Why? But it's a mentality that we have. We have to rush. We need things now.
Mhm.
You look at the history of place, things like bird's eye food. You know, was purposely made for that family that's on the go.
Right.
McDonald's made for that family that's on the go. South Africa made for that family that is taking their time. You know,
Right.
went to another restaurant there and it said fresh seafood. Over here, fresh seafood is it's you know it's laid out. You know, we go and we pick it up. We you know point to what we want. They wrap it up and we go. I never forget the man said, "Who wants the special today?" The special was a seared fish. Well, it didn't mention the fact that once you ordered 3 hours later after he got back from fishing for it is when you were going to get it. But it
Mm.
was just this introduction to the way things were there and the way that they're not here, you know. But it's the oral traditions. I talked to that guy about it. I said, so how did you learn to fish? Well, my father taught me and his father taught him, and it became this thing. And I said, so how many of y'all fish? And he said, all the men in our village. We live on the water, so we have a fishing village. That doesn't exist over here much.
No, not at all. Not at all. But the waters that are over here, you might not want to eat fish out of them anyway.
Well, remember the waters that they have, if the hippos aren't in it, then the great whites are. So I mean, it's a flip of the coin. What you trying to deal with?
Right. That or contamination,
Right.
you know. And it's funny when you talk about this, making that comparison. I think about the food deserts here, in Black and brown communities, and I think kind of funny. I think of one episode of All Shows, Good Times, and so it was Paula Kelly and Esther Roll, both of them, may they rest in peace, legends. Paula Kelly was playing a doctor, and Penny, played by Janet Jackson, was sick, and so Florida wanted the doctor to come see her, and the doctor had kind of gotten away from her roots. And she was even referring to Black people as you people, although she was Black herself. Of course, this was her character, not the real Paula Kelly, So Florida was like, no, I think the doctor was like, well, if you people just ate fresh fruits and vegetables and lean meats, and Florida was like, it's kind of hard to find those things in the ghetto. We eat what we can afford. So do you have any advice for people that might be low income, living in food deserts, how they can combat that?
That was also one of the discussion questions.
I figured it would be.
And I had another discussion lecture earlier in the week as well, when we talked about rice consumption and rice cultivation.
Mhm.
And one thing that, somebody said, well, I like to have watermelon, but watermelon's so expensive. And I said, go somewhere, buy a watermelon from like a Whole Foods or something, spend a little extra money, but get a watermelon with seeds. I grew up with watermelons with seeds. And the one thing that blows my mind is when I go to a store and it says fresh, organic, seedless watermelon. If it's organic, it's going to have seeds in it.
Right.
And I was, we had gotten to talking about having the seeds. And if you throw a handful of watermelon seeds out into your backyard, if you have strong enough soil, you come back in a few weeks, you're going to see what that flower looks like, and it's going to keep growing and growing and growing. I think one thing people fail to realize is, like I said before, we have the muscle memory on how to do this. I think we've gotten somewhat lazy, and we don't want to be picked on for having, oh, you can't even afford a store, you go to your backyard, but that's the best place. At least I see where it's coming from.
Right.
There's individuals in South Carolina that I worked with during my research that have seed banks in their homes. So they might eat some watermelon and instantly all the seeds are saved, they're dried, and they're properly stored. So when next planting season comes, they go and plant. Same thing with strawberries. They, pick the little seeds off of the strawberry, rinse them off, dry them out, store them, plant them. Getting back to planting is simple. You don't need 9-10 acres of land to do it. You could do it on a quarter. You can do it on less than that. But you have to begin to remember your roots. And building a raised bed, you just take 4 pieces of wood, some chicken wire. You get you some soil. Right now, think about all that. Now you're at $60. You plant those seeds. You have to wait. This is not like you're going to plant watermelon on Monday and on Thursday. You got this big old. It's going to take some time. But at the end of the day, you see where it's coming from. I remember growing up in Philadelphia, there was a community garden where it was about maybe 20, 25 different plots within this garden, and people were not sharecropping. They were sharing their foods. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if I got zucchini, you got okra, let me get half of those, you get half of these. The barter system was real, Mm-hmm. And I think we have gotten away from the barter system because we've also gotten away from being neighborly. It's easier now if your neighbor is being too loud, pick up the phone, dial 911 and handle it that way, as opposed to going knock on the door. Hey, how you doing? I'm Andre. This is my family over here. We see you new. Welcome. What's your name? We don't do that much anymore. And by not doing that, you become these individual cells within a community. So it's communities within a community of a community. And it becomes difficult to do things like barter with somebody because you don't know them.
Right.
So my grandma once told me, a closed mouth don't get fed. Mm-hmm. And I thought she just meant, if you keep your mouth closed, you're not gonna be able to eat the chicken. But what she meant was, if you don't ask for something, if you don't open your mouth and talk and introduce yourself, nothing good is gonna come.
Definitely. And it's interesting. I'm glad you brought up the community garden, because there are probably, people listening to us in cities like Philly and like New York, where for those who don't know, I think just about everybody does, that some of those cities you have row homes with no front yard, no backyard, so I'm glad you brought up the community garden. And even if they don't have a community garden in the area, for one, you could petition to start one. And if that's unsuccessful, you could just get a little wooden box, right? And just put some soil in there, and just grow what you need, and maybe not everything. There may be still some things you need to go to the store for, but these are just methods to combat if you're in a food desert. And for the most part, if you're in a food desert, it's probably going to stay that way for a while, because these big grocery store chains aren't trying to come, like Whole Foods, they go to certain areas, Trader Joe's, those kind of, they go to certain areas. That's just the way it is. Then there are other, general grocery stores, different, names, throughout the country, depending on where you are. They may be in your area, but still may be difficult to get to it, if they're a little further away. So these are just things that we can do, I guess, for ourselves to combat that and make it better for your community. Definitely. Hey, in closing, Dre, is there one last thing you'd like to say as far as, one, I guess, final point you want to make about the presentation that you did, and I guess the overall theme?
Open your mouth and talk to your elders. They have seen things that we're never going to see. Nobody is alive that saw the pandemic of 1918. So we scrap that. We're going through that together. But these are individuals who have seen sharecropping, for in some cases, individuals who have seen Jim Crow at its best. They have seen things like the Civil Rights Act be signed. They have seen the history that set the course for which we are walking on at this moment. Use your cell phone to record those voices. Use your video camera to record those voices, because once we close that pine box for the last time, that's it. And with that, there goes recipes, there goes family history, there goes family health history. So I think it's very critical and important to the preservation of our cultural heritage to take down these voices, listen to them, record them, and enjoy them, because generational wealth does not just mean finance. It means the wealth of knowing your family.
That's an excellent point. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why on this show, we always defer to the OG. We always we'll start talking for a little bit and we'd be like, OG, Dr. Neil Holmes, give us your take. And then we'll just sit back and listen, just like anybody else that's watching. And I always get, comments from people. Some people post the comments, and then I have people who that I talk to that I just say, man, the OG be, breaking it down. I'm like, that's why he's the OG, and that's why we have him. All right, thanks, Dre. I appreciate you, sharing, your experience with us. And, I know you're doing many big things in your role as an oral historian, so I hope you'll continue to share them with our viewers and listeners. And I will see you next week, my brother.
All right, now.
All right, take care.
Lord, yes, papi, hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and taught to have no fear.